Energy Transition, Episode 21. Premature Energy Transition. Good to see you both, Serena Slav and Dave Blackman. Good morning, good afternoon.
Good morning.
Hello, hello.
Shutting down fossil power plants without having enough renewables energy available is one of the reasons for the premature energy transition, Elena.
It's emerging now that the energy transition, the way it was planned, was a bit premature. Politicians were trying to do everything really quickly, more quickly than was sensible, I would say. And now we're seeing that it couldn't work. This race to secure any fossil fuels, really, coal, oil, gas, it's open season for fossil fuels, even though those in charge continue to say that we need to go renewable, we need to build more wind and more solar. But right now we need more fossil fuels. So they're waking up to the reality that, just building up wind and solar capacity is not enough. It cannot be done quickly enough. There are physical, material constraints to that. And it's not really sensible, because I'm not hearing about any solar wind records in output being broken right now. And it's summer in Europe. We should be seeing a lot of solar output, and we are seeing a lot of solar output. Wind is a bit, it depends on the country, because you can't trust the weather, as I like to say. So now they're racing to secure as much fossil fuel supplies as they can. Emissions have taken, the backseat right now.
And David, we can reach with renewables a level to replace partially the fossil fuels, or it will take a long time?
Well, yes, it will take a long time. It'll take a lot longer than the governments of Europe and the United States had imagined. And I think I hope at least what everyone is finally figuring out now is that there are limits to renewables' ability to replace fossil fuel in general, and that we're never going to achieve a full transition. That is something that's really not achievable, and just due to the limits of the laws of physics and thermodynamics and things we've discussed in the past. But we are, for example, in Texas. Texas is a great example. We've spent the last 20 years subsidizing wind, and now solar. We're having a big build out of solar in the state, and this summer, wind and solar are generating record new highs in terms of generation on our electricity grid in Texas. And that's all wonderful until you get into a major crisis, like we saw February of last year, when, because the problems continue to be that wind and solar are terrific when the weather's right. They're really terrific. And they can be inexpensive when deployed properly on an integrated grid. But when the weather is not right, when you have a major weather event like the winter storm Uri that caused the failure of the Texas grid in February of 2021, they become immediately pretty useless. And then if you don't have enough fossil fuel capacity or nuclear capacity to take up the slack, or if your plants freeze up, as happened in Texas during that event, then you end up with a disaster and people die as a result. And so it just is a reality that these are fine sources of energy. They really are. And I know I always sound like I'm bad mouthing them, but my advocacy is they're great as long as they're managed properly and as long as everyone lives in the real world and understands their limitations. And Rena has written so many good stories here this year about what's been happening in Europe. And what I'm hoping is, I'm really hopeful, although we continue to see signs it isn't happening, but I'm hopeful these leaders of these countries are finally coming to live in the real world. And that's why you see this scramble for fossil fuels and requests for waivers on emissions and things like that are coming from these governments in Germany and other European countries. I think maybe we're having a great awakening here where energy policy is concerned.
Irina, to avoid this premature transition, what the governments should do? What exactly the roadmap for this solution?
Well, I think that on the most basic level, they should slow down and reconsider their plans for net zero. Maybe extend these deadlines they are setting themselves. 55% reduction in emissions by 2030. It's really, they're setting themselves unrealistic goals. So it's what I've been saying again and again. Maybe just stop and think and start planning things better. As David says, both wind and solar are great sources of energy, but they are not as reliable as we need our energy to be. So it's a great thing to, for example, to incentivize with subsidies rooftop solar. It's a great idea to reduce permit times for such installations. I mean, here in Bulgaria, and we're kind of backward in this respect, a lot more backward than Germany. It takes about a year and a half to put a rooftop solar installation on the rooftop. And it's really a tough process. It's annoying, and you really have to be very motivated to go through with it. That's now not how you should do it. And then also encouraging, for example, factories that have the land. It's not arable land, it's not farmland. It's yards, for example. They can put solar there. Encourage this, encourage it more than you are now. But stop making these huge plans and talking generally about massive investments in wind and solar without giving any specifics. I mean, there must be specifics somewhere in the plans, but I'm worried about the timelines. I mean, I hope there are specifics, but I'm worried about the timelines. It's like we're in this huge rush and we're ready to spend anything, ready to do whatever it takes, just to hit these rather arbitrary goals, because they are arbitrary. Maybe, as David said, now reality is beginning to set in that we need fossil fuels. We can't escape from them as quickly as some thought we would. Maybe try to factor this in and stop pushing, just slow down a bit and be more realistic.
David, why the world does not mention the impacts and downsides of renewables? I mean, mining. What's the reason? What's the hidden reasons that we have in this?
Well, it so much of it has to do with the fact that we have the wrong class of people making these energy decisions. We have the political class makes all these decisions, and politicians are notorious for saying whatever they think they need to say to get reelected next time. And so we end up with all these narratives in the news media that are based on complete fantasies, just complete fantasies, but they make for good, attractive talking points in political campaigns in the West. I'm talking about in the Western world, Europe and the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South America. Brazil is another great example of this as well. And when you have that class of people making decisions, all they're going to do is mess things up. And that's exactly what we've seen in all these countries. And it's why we have such a major energy crisis today. Because the narrative has been that we can just debt spend our way into this energy, this glorious energy future. You know, like Biden says, this beautiful transition is the reason why we have high gasoline prices, and you're just going to have to, you should be happy about them because it's all part of the transition. Well, no. And now we're finding out that that's not really how things work in the real world. And we're going to have to do things differently. And you know, in the United States, and I'd be interested to know what you're seeing in Europe and South America about this. In the United States now, wind and solar are starting to become targets of the protester class, the environmental protesters, because they take up so much land and they disrupt habitats of so many species of animals, and they kill so many birds. And you know, and they have these enormous physical footprints. And one thing we're going to have to really see, particularly from, I think, solar, because it's a lot more flexible, is a focus less on these enormous solar farms that take up thousands and thousands of acres of land, and more rooftop solar, and not just on homes, but on these big box stores. If you fly over any city in the United States, there's all these white flat rooftops that would be ideal for the installation of solar. And that's going to have to become the future, I think, of renewables, is these rooftop applications that don't occupy land or kill animals or disrupt their habitats. And, you know, so this is all in great flux, and it's all a product of having the wrong people being the decision makers. And we see it now at the G7 summit as well.
Yeah, Irina, we are in favor of renewables, of course, but the point is not to be in favor or against. Is the speed is make adequate to make security, energy security. This is the point, no?
Yes, this is the main point. And also, as David just said, instead of focusing on huge sprawling solar farms far away from the grid, because it is important, solar installations are much better placed somewhere where there is already a grid connection, because it's cheaper to deploy. You know, do the practical thing, put them on rooftops, put wind farms where they are not so risky for wildlife, and where you don't have to clear up forests, because that's deforestation, in order to install them. Same with solar, by the way. Don't go all in on these two, you know, so-called renewable sources. And the reason I say so-called is because of what you mentioned. They need finite mineral and metal resources. They don't spring out into existence on their own. We will need a lot more mining in order to do this net zero transition.
Intense mining.
Yes, very intense mining of finite resources.
Yeah.
So while solar energy as is, energy from the sun is renewable, the sun is there, and wind is there, although not constantly and not everywhere. The technology we need to capture this energy and you know, turn it into electricity requires finite resources, non-renewable resources, even if some of them are recyclable. So it's not as easy and as sunshiny as politicians are trying to present it.
Yeah, that's right. David, your post from today about G7 deciding, it's crazy.
Oh,
brilliant.
It is so nuts. I mean, so for those who haven't seen it, the G7 announced Sunday, President Biden and the leaders of the other countries, that they're going to try to enforce a global price cap on Russian oil exports. Now, think about the hubris involved in that statement. These are 7 countries, Canada, the United States, and 5 European countries, who believe they are going to convince the rest of the world to place an artificial cap on the price of Russian oil. Now, Brazil is part of the BRICS coalition.
Yeah.
Brazil, Russia,
Russia.
India, China, and South Africa. That is an extraordinarily powerful economic powerhouse coalition of countries with billions and billions of population. And for the G7 to think that the BRICS countries are just going to abandon their priorities and their compelling national security interests to put a price cap on the major export of one of their member countries
Sorry.
is ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. And I read that story and almost fainted. I mean, really and truly, to think that it's just the most absurd thing yet. But I mean, it's like I say almost every day. It just gets worse every day in terms of the absurd political proposals that come out of these countries. And I think I owe you an apology, Armando, because my country thinks it's going to try to impose that on your country, which is just absurd.
Impressive.
Absolutely.
Impressive, Irina.
Yeah, it really is like a joke. It's a sad joke, but it really is ludicrous. I mean, they don't just have to convince the BRICS countries and every other importer of Russian oil. They have to somehow force Russia to say, yeah, okay, we'll sell our oil cheaply. Do they not think of the possibility, I don't know how slim this possibility is, that Russia will say, okay, we won't export any oil.
Yeah.
They just have to do this for a week.
Yeah, the price will be $200 a barrel, instead of $100, right?
Exactly. I mean, it feels like not just the G7 leaders, but most, if not all, Western leaders do not plan for contingencies. They do not think about every possibility, and they must, because we're talking about energy security for billions of people. You really need to plan for any contingency, not just for the outcome you would like to see. And I feel this is what they're doing right now. This is not how you do it.
It seems like children playing in the playground.
Yes.
Crazy.
Yes.
It is. That's exactly. What a great analogy.
Yeah.
Excellent conversation from today, Monday. Was a pleasure for me, Irina Slav and Dave Blackman. Thank you so much.
Pleasure too.
The highlight of my week. Thank you both.
Thanks.
Have a great week.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.